All right, Claire, thank you so much for being on here. It's truly an honor to have someone of your level of expertise on my podcast, so I appreciate it.
No, it's my pleasure.
So I have a million topics and questions I really want to explore, but just to start off the bat, as much and as comfort as you are to explain your story a little bit. From my understanding, I know you lost your parents at a rather young age, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's what led you to the path you're on right now. So I don't know which part of the story you'd like to start, but I'd love to kind of hear exactly what you went through even before we get into, how you become a grief expert and a therapist today.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think, becoming a grief expert and a therapist was not what I wanted to be growing up. So it was definitely my background and my personal experiences that led me to being in this position. When I was 14, both of my parents got cancer at the same time. I'm an only child, so it was, my whole little nuclear family was kind of suddenly very precarious. My mom died when I was 18, when I was a freshman in college. And then my father died 7 years later when I was 25. And it was just a lot. Their deaths were very different. Their approaches to death were very different. My grief around each of them was very different, as were my relationships with them. But, the end result was I was 25 years old and very much alone in the world and very much going through an experience that none of my peers were going through. They were all kind of post-college, living their lives in apartments in big cities and trying on relationships and careers. And I was just like, what the fuck is going on with my life? Why am I here? What happens when we die? Where are my parents? What's my purpose? Like, how do I sit with all this pain? And so it kind of just thrust me into a different place from the get-go. I kind of hit rock bottom before I began finding ways and tools to climb back up, and eventually decided to go back and get my master's in clinical psychology and become a therapist, and started working in hospice right out of the gate, and started writing books along the way. I'd always been a writer. That's what I had dreamed of being, not a grief therapist. And I'm still both. And so I've now written 3 books. I'm working on my 4th, and I've been a therapist for over a decade, specializing in grief.
Beautiful. I actually have one of your books in front of me right now. So one of the 3. So I'm curious to see what the 4th is, but we'll plug that in a little later. I just have a little bit more of a question in regards to what you went through, if you don't mind. So you said more of my question was, before it happened, were you ever, before it happened to your parents, were you ever exposed to death before them? Were you had any experience or idea of how to get through this prior to that? Because you said you started asking yourself a lot of questions naturally, of course, when something like that happens. So were you exposed to it earlier? Was there any other conversation or perspective you had on death that kind of prepped you for that? Or do you feel like it just completely hit you blindly?
A little both. I've talked to astrologers and psychics throughout my life. I love this stuff. And so many of them have told me that I was just primed to do this work. And I've just kind of always been surrounded by this stuff. I had a nanny that I loved who died in our home while I was taking a nap when I was very little. And that was my first real experience of death and grief and thinking about these things. And then I had a traumatic pet loss, in that it was my fault that the dog died. And it was, I was super close with the dog, and that was in 4th grade. And so there were a couple things that were pretty intense. I lost a grandfather, but that was one of the more regular deaths. And then there were these other 2. Nonetheless, nothing can really prepare you for a big loss like the ones that I went through early on. And I was very grateful that I was a writer and had that outlet, because it was just what I turned to. I had no idea how to process it all. And that was really helpful to me.
I'm curious about what your first, the first, I guess it's kind of an ambiguous number, but the first year when you first lost your mother, I mean, your book, Anxiety, the Missing Stage of Grief, I like to think maybe that's kind of what you went through, but was that the main emotion that you went through? I'm sure there's a million of them, but you personally, what did you feel the most in the beginning of really grieving, and how did you personally get through that, if you don't mind?
Yeah, that was the hardest for sure that year. I felt very shocked by her death, even though she'd been sick for a long time. I just was really unprepared to lose my mom. She and I were incredibly close, and we never talked about the fact that she would die or the idea that she would die. She had been largely unable to face it herself. And so we didn't have conversations about it. We didn't say goodbye. I wasn't there the night she died. And so all of a sudden she was gone, and I didn't know how to be in the world without her. The world felt really scary, led to a lot of my anxiety and panic attacks. And I just couldn't believe that this terrible thing had happened. And it made me feel like all kinds of terrible things could happen. And I didn't even cry for like a year because I couldn't even wrap my head around the fact that I was going to live a life without my mom. And so when that finally began to seep in, then I cried for like 5 years. But initially that first year was like this kind of like blind pain and shock and kind of disbelief and real panic.
You lost your dad, what, 6-7 years after, give or take?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 7 years.
I mean, is there, like you said, even if you've gone through something, regardless if it's death or something else, something as traumatic as this, how prepared can you be? But what were the differences between losing your mother and your father? And I don't mean to pry on your personal relationship with them.
You can ask me anything. It's all good.
Then what was the difference? That's a pretty small gap. And like, obviously there's relationship differences like one has with a sibling or a sister, regardless of the hierarchy of it. But I'm curious to see if that prep you for it. Was that easier? Was it harder? And what the hell?
Yeah, they were super different. And to understand some of that, you have to understand that my parents, my mom was 40 when I was born and my dad was 57. They met late in life. They were each other's third marriage. So that we kind of had this little unusual life. If anything, everyone kind of thought my dad would die early. I would lose my father early because he was so much older when I was born. But instead, it was my mom that went first. So when she died, I already knew that I wasn't going to have him for long. And that contributed to an enormous amount of my anxiety. And it became this thing that was looming over me. Like I knew I was going to be parentless before 30. And I just tried to sit with that all the time and didn't know how to. And it made me really obsessed with his death, with being there, with spending time with him, with being prepared for it in all the ways that I hadn't been with my mother. So that was what was happening on my end. But on his end, he was also this like amazing person. He'd been in World War II. He'd been a POW. He had just lived this very adventurous life. He'd kind of embraced change and uncertainty, and it was no different with his death. He was actually quite curious about it. He asked me to be curious with him. He wanted to die at home. He really wanted to face it. So we had this incredibly different experience that I had with my mom. And I was with him and I was holding his hand and we'd had all the conversations and we'd said goodbyes. And it was quite beautiful, even though I was desperately sad and didn't want him to die. It was pretty much the most beautiful death he could have had. So it was very different in that regard. My mother's, I just felt so much angst and regret and just so much turmoil. And his was very peaceful and beautiful. And I miss him dearly to this day, but I don't have that same kind of angst around his death that I do with my mother's.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like kind of polar opposites, if you ask me. Especially, I've heard you on your own podcast. Mm-hmm. I've listened to a few episodes, and you mentioned what you just mentioned now in regards to that she didn't speak to you about it or prep you. I don't know if that's the right word. And then father seemed to do the opposite. So I was curious, how did your father handle the death of his wife, your mother, in regards to his own grief and how he prepped you? Because it seemed like the life he lived, he was around traumatic situations and let alone death. Yeah. So was there you guys have a heavy dialogue, or what kind of relationship did you have during that process?
He did. I mean, he was super zen, right? He'd just been through so much. He jumped out of a burning airplane in like 1944, and the half of his crew died. He landed in what was then the Czechoslovakia, and was in a POW camp for 6 months. He went through multiple losses, multiple traumas, and by the time he was 83, which was when he died, he was so like zen about everything. And he's like, "Well, kiddo, this is life," and and on some level that was awesome. He was also just really generous with my experience of it. He didn't try to tell me how to feel. He didn't try to take it away or change it. He just sat and held space while I cried or while I had these big existential questions or went through my pain. And then he would just, lean back in his chair with a glass of vodka and be like, "Well, this is life."
Frank Sinatra song.
Totally. Which was really kind of amazing. And it chilled me out, in a lot of ways. And I feel like I've adopted some of that at this point now. I've been through so much of mine, and my girls, my daughters will get all worked up about stuff. And I'm like, well, guys,
Honestly, what the hell are you going to do? That's kind of my approach to life, for better or for worse. Honestly, I'm still trying to figure out if there is even a right approach. I've heard you say, like, there's no right way to grieve. It's just kind of, I don't know, I guess everyone does it differently. I kind of wanted to, I don't even know if this is a good transition, but I was curious to reflect off your first year and kind of the feelings you had during your grief. So my dad died when I was 12 on 9/11, and there's so much I don't remember. And I'm very clear. I'm not as knowledgeable as you are on the topic. I'm just experiential, I guess. I'm not as studied as you are, but I am pretty clear on the fact that that's clearly a defense mechanism, I'm assuming, of being at such a young age of 12 and such a traumatic experience of, besides 9/11, losing my dad, that there's so much I don't remember. Like I feel like there was at some point, like I remember my childhood, but there's parts that I feel like I just kind of like skipped. And I don't remember how I felt. And it's so frustrating that I don't remember. Like my mom points out, reminds me of some things that she experienced, blah, blah, blah. I don't remember how I felt. So my question to you is, I don't want to say, is that normal? Because I'm assuming that's relatively common, more or less. But is there any way of, from your experience, is there any way of bringing back those memories, or trying to, I'm assuming it's deep down in my subconscious mind somewhere. I know that. Have you had any experience of unraveling forgotten memories due to a traumatic experience like that?
Yeah, this is so interesting. I definitely think it's absolutely possible. It takes work. It takes lots of different things and experiences and ways of digging into it. But I will say the age of 12 is such a tricky age to go through a big loss and a trauma. I work predominantly with people who've lost a parent. And for everyone I've worked with who lost a parent in childhood, adolescence, kind of any time before 16, really, we're not developmentally capable of processing the loss. So we process it in all these kind of fucked up ways, right? Like we just do our best at age 12 to understand this, but we can't really understand it. So we usually like put it into the wrong boxes, the best ones we can at the moment, but then not the boxes that, would be best to put it in at, say, age 32, which is
where I'm at today.
32 now. What's that?
Which is where I'm at today. It's ironic.
Yeah.
You said that. So seeing things as a grown man, it's like, I feel like I'm going backwards.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. So that's what happens. So people will come and find me at exactly around this age. I always say it's between the ages of 28 and 32. People will come and find me and they want to process a loss that happened 20 years ago. Because there's something that finally clicks into place between the ages of 28 and 32, I think, where we are fully developmentally capable of understanding that loss. And we suddenly see it in a whole new way where we're like, oh my God, this is what it meant for me to lose my dad in 9/11 20 years ago. Like, holy shit, that's a really big deal in this way that you couldn't fully understand back then, or even along the way somewhat. And now you're sitting with the enormity of it in a brand new way. And it's kind of an amazing time to process it and to look at it. Really understand him until getting to around this age too, like who he was and like feeling almost like, wow, how old was he when he died?
He was 46, I believe, because it was 2001, 1955. So yeah, about 46.
Yeah. So not that much older than you now, and like.
That's the thing sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. Also, I don't mean to ask for like free therapy right now. So please cut me off.
I'm super interested.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the thing that always messes with me the most. And a big part of this podcast is I don't want to backtrack or get all over the place, which I don't really care if we do, whatever. There's no rules to this. Is that my dad died on a very public platform, which people have heard me say before. So part of me is wanting to get other people to talk, because it's a weird thing to say. I was fortunate enough to have my dad die in the public light. So I get all this acknowledgement that I didn't ask for. My mom, his sister's family didn't ask for. So I wanted to shed the light on other people. I don't even know where I was going with that, but back forward to what you were saying is I missed like the conversation, like as a grown man, the man to man. I remember my father. He was a great father, but there's just so much like I didn't know, like how much is as a grown father gonna tell your 12-year-old son? Obviously, he's probably gonna wait till he's 18. Like that's like the best moments to have with the father is with the age I'm now, arguably. So I missed that, but I forget so much. And I think like what you're saying, I've really reflected on these over the years, and I feel like I had to grow up faster. But now, as I'm even getting older, there's more things, there's more questions that I have, and I'm definitely vibing with what you're telling me is that this is a interesting age, even though I'm at the pinnacle of your age range that you discussed. And I don't even know at this point, I don't even know what to make of it. Like my grief's evolved. So I feel like I'm as healed as you'll ever get. I don't think you'll get fully healed, but
Yeah.
you just change.
You'll never get fully healed. You'll always live with this. But I think this is a really incredible time and opportunity for you to dig into it all. I imagine that your dad was probably around your age when he had you, right?
Yeah,
How old?
right. Yeah, because he's 46. He's probably 30, at least 33, 34.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're suddenly in this place where you can kind of imagine yourself in your dad's shoes or be like, wow, this my dad had like, he was this young when I was born, or, he was this young when he did things that about jobs or moves or whatever it is. And so it's a really cool new way to understand him and to think about him and to kind of commune with him. Like, I think that is one of the things I think about a lot. Like we develop an internal relationship with the people we lose. And, the relationship doesn't end because he's not here physically anymore. You still have this relationship with him. You're thinking about him all the time. You're understanding him in new ways. You're wondering what he would think of you. You're yearning to talk with him. Like, that relationship is still very much alive. So what are ways you can commune with him? I would do some digging into what he was up to at this age that you are right now, because you can feel it more than ever,
Yeah, it's funny. We put my dad on like a pedestal, but I want to he's a human. I fucked up. So I'm like, where did my dad fuck up? Like, what shit did he do? Like that I'm like, I always like to see the other side of the coin, devil's advocate type stuff. Like, what were his flaws almost? Like, I have my dad on this pedestal, which he was, and even the people that I know back him up. But is it weird that I want to know like the dark stuff? Because I'm not saying
but just all the real sides of him.
Yeah. Exactly. I feel like that's the stuff that would have came out.
Yeah.
So when you're saying, obviously they don't stay away from us. I've heard you say on one of your platforms, I don't know if I read it or I heard it, that you personally felt disconnected from the people that you've lost, AKA your parents at some point. I don't know when it was. Correct me if I'm wrong. I might be blabbering. But then you found ways or you offered tools to your clients and yourself even of staying connected. And is that what you mean by, whether it's interior dialogue or writing or?
So, 20, 30, 40 years ago in the grief clinical world, the emphasis used to be on helping people let go. So you go through a loss and it's like, let's move on. Let's get you a stepdad, or whatever. Like, let's let go. And now we've realized that what actually is most helpful in healing is to find ways to stay connected and to stay in communion, in relationship with them. And so a lot of the work I'll do with people who are far out from a loss like you is kind of help you find ways to reconnect. Or if it's someone who's new into a loss, a lot of very encouraging, let's find ways from the get-go to keep you connected to that person. The relationship obviously is changing. It's not the one you want, but let's find ways to stay connected. For me, I definitely felt, by the time I was in my early 30s, felt very disconnected from both of my parents. I felt like it was so painful to imagine a relationship with them that wasn't in person, that I just had kind of tried to push it all away. So I spent a period of years finding ways to reconnect. I wrote a whole book about it. It's my second book. It's called After This. And I just dug into all these crazy things. I saw shamans and psychic mediums, and I saw, priests and rabbis, and I just got into everything. What are all the different kind of routes we can find to connect with people that are gone, and what happens when we die? And I did not find the exact answer, but I found some really helpful frameworks and some feelings of connection that I feel closer to my mom now than I did 10 years ago.
Wow.
She's been gone for over 20, but that's really interesting to be able to say, right?
Yeah. I believe, that's amazing. And I'm curious to say, you said you saw mediums and whatnot. Have you had an experience with, what was his name? The popular medium, John Edwards?
Yeah, he was the first one I saw. I've seen a bunch. I've seen 24 out of research, but it's fun and fascinating. And some of them suck and some of them are mind blowing, right? I still can't explain any of it.
Does that change your perspective? That's have shaped you some way. Cause I've seen a couple, we saw George Anderson was another commercially popular medium. I don't remember that because we did it pretty young. But what does that do to your psyche in regards to believing what is next? Obviously some of them you have to, I don't know, spraying bullshit, but so I put my antenna up and take it with a grain of salt. But when they give me a message that's like, okay, how the hell did you know that? It's hard for me to kind of push it away. So what does that do to someone like you that's gone so deep in the aspect of death? Where are you with that, and how does that shape you?
I've gotten to the place where I went from being pretty atheist / agnostic, leaning towards there's nothing, I don't believe in anything, definitely coming around to full agnosticism where I just don't know. And I'm curious. I can't explain any of it. Some of the experiences I've had with mystics and psychics and mediums were just so profound. And so they just made me feel like I remember when I walked out of this psychic's office and I felt like I was in the fucking Matrix. I was like, nothing is what I thought it was. I remember I went and sat in a Starbucks and I was looking around at all the people just drinking their coffee. And I was like, holy shit, it's all an illusion. Like, we don't know anything. Because the experience with this woman had been so real that it just, I mean, like she brought my parents and a half brother. And I was like, there's no way this isn't real. So I've had those experiences and I don't know where to put them, right? Because I can't scientifically explain them. So for me, I feel like for the first time in my life, I've developed this thing called faith. And I don't even know what that means because it's not like in a Christian level or like anything like that. It's just like this weird faith in that there's something bigger than this.
I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. So how do you feel about dying? At this point, I'm curious to you. Are you just straight up cool with it? Like, where are you with that?
No. I don't want to die. I'm scared of it.
It is terrifying. I don't know if I'm scared of it. There's so many levels of death. It's like, okay, you're scared of how you're going to die and where you're going to go. What freaks me out is, you ever heard of Jim Jeffries? I think he's an Australian comedian.
Mm-mm.
He has a great bit about dying that always stuck with me. And it kind of really made me think on so many levels. There's so many times I look up, I'm like, I don't know what's going on. But he always says, if you die and then you're wherever you are in heaven for eternity, he's like, eventually you're going to get bored. And then what the hell do you do? It's like, and I thought about that, that's terrifying. I'm like, what the hell am I going to do all this? It's 10:30 on a Tuesday. I'm like, what am I doing next? Do I have an appointment? I don't even know for an eternity if that's really what's going to happen. But then you think, okay, if it's just nothing, then you're just nothing forever. But then I guess if you're nothing, you don't even, it doesn't.
Right. I can just get paralyzed in a chair for a day trying to think about these things.
At one point you just cut it off. And it's that's why I think the conversation of death is so important, but you also kind of got to balance the spectrum, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm scared of it. I'm scared of what it will feel like. I'm scared of what is on the other side. If there's anything, I'm mostly terrified to leave my kid. I love my kids so much. I have 3 kids and I just can't bear the thought of them losing a parent and me not being here for all those moments that my parents also missed. And so that is my biggest fear for sure. And that's very tied to my own losses. But yeah, no, I don't want to do it.
No, I could avoid it. Well, maybe Elon Musk will come up with something. What's the conversation you have? Do you speak about death with your kids now? I don't know how old they are, if you don't mind divulging that.
Yeah, they're 12, 9, and 3. And yeah, for sure. I mean, because they know what I do. They know my work and my story, and they hear their constant roll in their eyes. Oh, mom's talking about that. And every time I'm like, look, guys, I'm on TV. And they're like, yeah, I'm talking about grief and death. Cool, mom. So they know all about it. Yeah. But
I feel like you have a sense of humor. Clearly have a sense of humor.
And, you have to, right?
Same boat.
I think it's important. Yeah. So yeah, we definitely talk about it. And I think we have really cool open conversations about it. They've one of my daughters has lost a couple of classmates in the last few years. We've had a lot of conversations. I went through a phase where I was thinking about writing a children's book about death. So I ordered all these children's books about deaths and they were like, cool, children's books. And then we read all these death books, had all these funny conversations.
You say that, I mean to go off screen, but have you ever heard of it?
Oh yeah, I have that one. Yeah.
I spoke to her one of my last episodes.
Oh, cool.
I thought that was so fascinating because I don't know if it goes back to me being a young kid, and I just love children's books because I think it's messages that I wish adults would take seriously that kids are getting. And it's such a difficult topic for children, let alone grown adults, I feel struggle with this conversation. So it's such a cool way of explaining it. So if you write a book about a children's book, I feel like you'd be amazed. But your sense of humor and your personality, I can tell in the next 30 minutes, I'm having it on my desk as well because I feel like it's such an important conversation. And what's your take on, what is there an age when you start bringing it up with kids? How would you personally approach that? I know you've already kind of spoke on with your own kids knowing, but do you have a rule of thumb with approaching kids that haven't experienced death yet?
We always talk about it. I think it's really important to just talk about it. Like, I think people are really afraid to talk to kids about death, but they have such cool ideas. I always just turn it around. I'm like, what do you think happens? I think people are afraid to not have the answers that kids will ask. Like, where is grandpa? And like, is he okay? Did it hurt at the end? And, it's okay to say, I don't know, like, what do you think? I don't know. And usually they come up with these really creative, fantastical ideas that you wouldn't even think of as a boring adult, right? So it's fun to engage in those conversations. And I think it's helpful because when we all inevitably face death and grief at many different points in our lifetimes, to feel like you have the freedom to talk about it, to be creative in your thinking, to open up to different ideas. If we can start that at a young age, I think it's really helpful. When we shield people from death and dying and grief, then it blindsides them and they don't even know where to turn with it. So I think that that's more harmful.
I agree. And that's kind of something I've attempted to accomplish with this podcast. I wanted the conversation to be, and it's very easy with you, by the way, talking about it and just being a little relaxed about the conversation, coming from people that have experienced it. And I really want to get to people, even my friends that haven't been fortunate enough. It's weird. I say fortunate enough to not have experienced death, but all at the same time, I feel fortunate that I've experienced death in so many ways. And I've always learned that I don't want people to wait for a traumatic experience or something to shift their world to not take things for granted and learn X, Y, Z.
Totally.
So I really just want this message and this topic and people and the work of people like you guys are doing, that you are doing, to get through to people that haven't experienced it. Because I feel like those people are most common to just push it off. And it's like, it's not part of my, I don't want to listen to this conversation. So I always wondered how to get through to people that haven't experienced it, to just, acknowledge it a little bit and not push it away. Cause I'm so scared of people pushing anything away, regardless of any emotions in general, just burying it. You said earlier how people say, oh, if you lost a parent, get a stepdad right away, as opposed to feeling it. It's like, why is it just our society that feels like it's better to push things away as opposed to facing it, especially death?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, like you and I are admitting to being scared of death and dying, I think, and yet we probably have much more of an understanding or have thought a lot more about it or sat with it, and we're still scared of it. So then the average person who hasn't really sat with it at all is probably super scared of it to the point where they can't even let themselves think about it. They push it away right away. And our culture just isn't great at embracing it, at talking about it, at providing space. I've been really heartened the last year of the pandemic because it's been this wake up call that we do need to talk about it more. We do need to be thinking about it and prepping for it. And just, I couldn't stop thinking about all the frontline like nurses and healthcare workers. They don't even teach death and dying in med school, let alone to doctors, but also to like, nurses and other healthcare workers. They don't even have a fucking course on death and dying in their training, right? So
Like Elizabeth Kubler-Ross would be rolling in her grave right now.
I know. And so here was all these people like sitting there letting their patients say goodbye on FaceTime phones, and they weren't prepped at all in any way to even like handle it for themselves, let alone handle it for other people. And that made me really sad. It's just such a disservice to our culture. And I think that we failure. So I'm hopeful that there is some change that's come out of this giant worldwide tragedy. And people have been more excited to talk to me than ever about death and dying. So I'm like, all right. Like people are interested, and maybe we'll make some changes here.
You get that perspective from working in hospice, or just from your own research? Like of realizing, that I guess the people that are taking care of us aren't even trained in that aspect, and at least in an aspect of dealing with it. So what was your experience with hospice?
Hospice was great. I mean, but hospice only attracts like the weirdos who are like super open to death and want to be in that in some way. I had such a good experience with hospice when my father had it, that and again, I was in grad school to become a therapist, and there was a class, not on death and dying, but on aging. And there was like a little bit of death in the aging class. And so in that class, everybody, even the therapists that in training around me were like, oh, I don't want to work in that field. I wouldn't work in death and dying. And I was like, oh my God, well, shit, if nobody's going to do it, I better do it because I'm comfortable with it and I'll talk about it. And so when I chose to work in hospice, kind of everybody else was like that too. They'd had some experience with it. They were comfortable with it. They had a big heart around sitting with other people who were going through it. But it's a very unusual slice of society,
Yeah.
And still, none of us were trained in any particular capacity on how to deal with death and dying. It's fascinating to me. It really blows my mind.
It's so fascinating, but I feel like it clearly runs parallel to our society, at least. I feel like there's so many other cultures that I've read up on that are handle it so much, and they're way more intimate with the process.
Totally.
That reflects, our society in general, handling this and kind of like not putting it on a pedestal of maybe we should kind of cope with this. What is more, like people say, what is more common than we all share of dying?
Right. There isn't anything.
Breathing and taxes? No, like some people don't breathe. Some people don't, like.
We're all born. We all die.
Yet we still like push it on the side. That's why I think this conversation is so important to everyone, whether you've gone through it or not. It's just like, how do you get people? I don't know. How do you guys? I'm trying to just get it to people that in the nicest way possible. Me personally, I'm a little sicko on like dark comedy, so I've evolved and gone through. I make like 9/11 jokes. Like some people rough around the edges. Sorry, I like making jokes about it, but I had a good dad. I'm not doing it spitefully. Like,
right?
How else are we supposed to get through it? To me, it's humor.
No, I agree, and I think that we just like the more palatable we can make it for people, then that's great. I have a friend who's a death doula, and she always says, talking about sex isn't going to get you pregnant. Talking about death isn't going to make you dead.
That is so good. Oh my God.
Isn't that great?
That's literally perfect.
I know.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah. So I think, I think people are afraid to talk about it. I feel like they think they're going to bring it on, if we talk about it.
I mean, maybe, I don't know, maybe if you think about something enough, I believe you bring things on, but I mean, relax a little bit. Jesus.
Yeah.
If someone get hit by a bus after my podcast, then maybe I'll put it short, but God forbid. So in regards to that, can you talk about your fourth book, or is it kind of on the low?
Yeah, I'm just starting on it. It's called Conscious Grieving. It's pretty much what it sounds like, but it's, for me, it is about this conversation we're having where I feel like a lot of people treat grief as an affliction, like this thing we got to get over and this horrible thing. And let's not talk about it. Let's hush it up and get through it. And I just think there's so much to lean into. There's so much to learn from grief and loss. There's so many ways that, like you said, after you go through a big loss like that, you just see the world in a different way. It's not that you're grateful that you lost your dad, but you are grateful for the experience of what it taught you. And I think that there is, I think there's some cheesier ideas out there, like the gifts of grief, but it's true. There's so much we learn. I can't imagine who I would be had I not gone through all this. I feel like I would be really boring and materialistic and, just not who I am now today. And so the whole point of the book is, how do we lean into it? How do we embrace grief, even when it's really painful? How do we, let it change us in good ways and grow from it? And yeah.
I love that. That's such an important lesson, because I've personally known so many people that, could get like, I feel like we went that way after some time, but some people can go that way and never get out of that hole. And I wonder.
Yeah. People get stuck. People get really stuck in grief.
I guess, there's so many variables I would think that are just nature versus nurture and what they've gone through and blah, blah, blah. But it's just so interesting to me how I have so many amazing people like you on this podcast that chose the path of strength. I couldn't think of a fun adjective for that, but chosen the path of seeing the light and getting out of it. And it really hurts me when I see people that never recover from it. And I've had experience that with friends that lost a husband and they went straight downhill, never recovered. And then I look at my mother, who is an absolute bull, and I would not have, I have so many people in my life, I was blessed, friends, family, sisters that have just got me through. I feel like I can't even take credit for it. Mm-hmm. But the way my mother handled it was just, she took the bull by the horns. I don't know what made her do that and some others not do that. You know what I mean? So
yeah, it is interesting. I think it's such a mix of nature versus nurture. It's the environment, it's the support you have around you, it's your personality, it's your relationship with the person you lost. It's like a million things. And it's never too late to kind of get unstuck, I 100%. Think. You could be 30 years into it and still get unstuck somehow.
That's a stigma for, regardless if it's lost or whatever it is. When people hit a certain age, yes, it gets harder, of course. Mm-hmm. Obviously, like 0 to 7, you're more malleable, and after that, things get harder to kind of like change the way you are. But you can do it. Mm-hmm. And people like there's negative people that I speak to are like, oh, I got my heart broken. I'm never gonna love again. I'm like, dude, shut the fuck up. Like you that's a paradigm in your own head. You can't get out of it. It's deeper you get, it might get harder, but you can. Right. It breaks my heart when I see people that get deep in their life that aren't healed out, later in their life. I just like people like you are doing God's work of just like still showing that you can get out of it.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, it's about moving through fear, right? And it's about just people are so afraid to open up, to love again, to open up their hearts, to get hurt, to be vulnerable. And it's scary as hell. It's always scary.
Right.
But we can do it.
Yeah. And what else at the end of the day, as scary as it is, like, what are we going to do?
Right.
I mean, yeah, I can't get out. It's like, so at some point, it's acceptance. I mean,
yeah.
What else can you do besides accept it? Like, it is like your dad used to say, well, it's life, baby. It's like, it is what it is. And I think there's a balance of that perspective. Like I've always said that I have kind of very similar to the perspective of your father. Mm-hmm. I haven't had the same experiences, granted, but it's also a fine line between kind of pushing it away / having that perspective. So I think there is a balance saying it is what it is but acceptance and is what it is, I think is a very important blend of saying it is what it is. And you're kind of pushing it away at the same time. So I think I want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. There's so many...
How was the 20-year anniversary for you? That was such a big one.
Yeah. Isn't it so interesting? I was talking to be like, there's 19 years you feel one, then all of a sudden 20, like that round number
right?
makes it something. It's like, I don't know what that is. It was good. I was there and I went with my family. I flew in. We don't go to the memorial every year, but this is like 20. I wasn't sure if I was going to fly in, but my mom, my sisters were going, so I couldn't miss it. But it was good. They do a really good job. Like the memorial hat, and I'm not sure if you've been there. Have you been there?
Mm-mm. I haven't been there. I was in New York the day it happened, but I was in Manhattan. So for me, I had this, like, I wasn't expecting to feel so hit by the 20-year mark. And I really was affected by it, just really contemplative, just, feeling some grief and just thinking about it all a lot, feeling very contemplative. That was what I felt.
This year for me, I've always been pretty contemplative, but this year definitely more. It got pretty. It was pretty emotional, like as you would expect. My nephew, my oldest sister's kids, read the names, and that was a crazy moment. So he ended up being like he made the New York Post, which was cool. It was a really cool little like small little excerpt on it. And that was a really powerful moment. Me and my other oldest sister was in the back with him, waiting for him to speak. He said some really nice words off the cuff, like freestyled it, which is amazing. He's 10 years old. And he got off stage, and then I saw from like maybe 30 yards out, my sister and him embrace, and he started breaking down at 10 years old, which is crazy because I was 12, he was 10. He understood the capacity of it. And for whatever reason, the entire time leading up to it, he was so cool, calm, and collected. Yeah. Talking to his father, my brother-in-law was a brother to me. And he was saying, I felt like, who knew my father for forever. He's like, I felt like Dave, my dad, was there. And got him through that, as weird as that sounds, because he was so calm.
Oh my God, I have chills.
And then me too. Me too. And then as soon as he got off stage, him and my sister just embraced him. My sister started crying. I with my mom, my brother-in-law was like so emotional to see that. She was like, people started coming to her. And it was just such a powerful moment. And I spoke to my sister Jacqueline afterwards. And it's like Jake said, I'm sorry, Ma, I couldn't hold it anymore. He just let it go. And then it was embarrassed that he was crying. And apparently like 2 police officers that were behind, like gave him a round of applause. And we're like, it was seriously like, it was a movie. And there was so many, and the contemplative part and the bizarre part was, it was a new generation. It felt like in the 20, maybe it was the last year to notice it, but they had grandchildren speaking. And it was weird to me that like, they weren't even alive, and they're going to be reading about this and learning about this in their history class and passing on their grandfather, and just the idea of how long we've come, and that life just continues on. It doesn't stop.
Yeah.
It really doesn't stop.
That's the amazing part though, too, like think about how present your dad is and all of those things and all of these people and these moments. I talked to this rabbi once for that Afterlife book I was working on, and he was really kind of emphasizing that there's not a big emphasis on the afterlife in Judaism, and that when we think about the afterlife, it's about what's happening now and how people are present now, how their morals and values are showing up in other generations, how their lives are still kind of playing out here now. Like this is the afterlife, And so when I hear that story, like that is your dad's afterlife. Like this is your daddy's here, and how amazing that is. Like it kind of blows my mind.
Yeah, he definitely has a heavy presence. Like he's just that type of person, and I feel like I'm giving a eulogy right now, but he has a heavy presence, like that, his personality from what I knew. And when I've had experiences with mediums, even people I know, mom, my sister, every time, and I try to call bullshit. I try to I don't know if that's the Italian Guinea little perspective of what are you getting at? Yeah. And every time he's always come through very hard. Like there's been multiple times with some mediums that we got to, my mom, my son, and my sister, they started immediately crying, even in group sessions. which, I'm sure you're familiar with. He's come through first, and the mediums cried from an overwhelming amount of emotion, which led to the dissectiveness of figuring out it was my father. And same thing, I had some people on here that has some connection to the other side, and it was the same thing. And I've heard, they felt his presence. So
that's awesome.
It's awesome. It's beautiful. It's comforting, and it's frustrating. Like if he's right there, that's like, if that is true, I'm kind of similar to you. I don't think anything's absolute, but I'm also not going to dismiss anything because we won't know till we know. I have my beliefs, I have my faiths. That's up to me. But I don't know what the hell's coming. But it is kind of like frustrating that if he's right there, like right in arm's length, it feels like. It's like, what the fuck?
I know.
Frustrating. But I don't feel anger. I don't know if I've ever felt anger, but that could be part of the portion that I mentioned. I don't remember. So I got to do some regression work or something. Maybe I'll talk to you a little more after this and see if, I don't know, like I said, maybe you'll be my girl, but.
For sure. Do you have kids?
No, I have no kids. Thank God. I love kids. I have 5 nephews, love them to death, but I'm good right now. And you said my dad was my age. My senior, I was like, shit. Like I would be able to. I'm good. If it happened, I'm good. I have a beautiful girlfriend right now. I'd be good. I'd be happy. I'd be a fucking great father. I know that. I'd make it work. But like at the same time, like I'm okay right now.
I will tell you that having kids brought my parents back in ways I never could have expected, and it also brought memories back for me. I constantly have them now. I get flooded with them, and they're like triggered by my children's ages, like even just last night, my daughter was going through something with some friend group at our school or talking about sex or something. And I was like, oh my God, I'm not ready for this. And then I had such an intense flash of a conversation with my mother I hadn't thought about in years. Like, I don't even know if I knew I had that memory, and it's been like that for the last over a decade since I've been a mom. But I remember when my first daughter was born, just sitting and holding her in like a rocking chair and just fucking weeping. I was like, oh, I get why I miss my parents. Like, and it was this thing that wasn't tangible. It wasn't something I could name or put words on or put a memory on, but it was like this, just sitting there and holding her and looking at her. I was like, oh, this is what that is. And so in a way that even brought my parents back. It's been really fascinating to me with all of that.
I should ask my sisters that. They have 2 and 3 kids. I wonder if they had something like that, which I would imagine they would have. Mm-hmm. I understand it without having kids in a sense, but I'll never understand it until I have kids. Obviously, that's a whole nother ballgame.
Yeah. But I get that frustration. I understand it. Where are they? I'm a terrible medium. I have 0 mediumship skills, like 0.
That's about as close as I get. So partially, I always try to connect with them on that level, but I think I forced it too much. But that's a whole nother conversation. Listen, I want to be respectful of your time because I know we're pushing that hour mark. But one thing, if you could leave off with on one thing, this is very general because obviously I think the advice that I'm going to ask for, not for me, for whoever's listening, is depends on their circumstance. But is there a general message that you would give to people that are grieving? And obviously, it differentiates with who they lost, their time, who they are. But I don't know if I'm putting you on the spot. But is there something that you would overlay someone that's listening right now that might be grieving?
Okay, yeah. I mean, I think my general message would just be to give yourself space and time. Like, don't skip the grief. Don't push through it too hard. It's actually like a really tender, beautiful opportunity to be in the world, to know yourself, to think about the person that you lost. And I think we try to rush through it. I think we try to skip through the pain, but there's just so much there. There's so much there to lean into and to learn about. And also that grief takes a long time. It's not going anywhere. So you can try to skip through it too, but it's going to come back and have its way with you at some point. Mm-hmm. So give yourself just a wide berth to understand it and to be in it. And just self-compassion. I don't know why we beat ourselves up all the time. We beat ourselves up for not grieving the right way, being mad, being sad, being numb. There's just let yourself be how you want to be and how you need to be. And, don't feel like you need to beat yourself up about however it is you feel.
Amen. I love that. I feel like myself and plenty of others feel all these sorts of emotions and feel like we're doing it wrong, but I don't know if there's a wrong way to do it.
Yeah, there's not.
No, and if anyone know more, I believe that is you. So Claire, I really want to thank you for being there. I thought that was such a great conversation. I know that we could probably go on for like 12 more hours and marvelous interviews. I'm really hoping this gets through to some people, and I look forward to everyone hearing this. And that's really it. But thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I love this conversation. Happy to talk anytime. And I'm grateful for the work you're doing.
I appreciate it. We'll definitely stay in touch. And if there's anything ever I can do for you, whatever that may be, maybe we'll figure it out. But if I can ever be of service, I'll be good.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you, David.
I'll follow up with you. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Dead Talks. Please do not forget to hit the subscribe button and also the notification bell. That'll give you updates as to when we post a new video, more episodes, and more content in general. We are streaming on all the major podcast platforms, including Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, and all that. And also find us on Instagram at Dead Talks Podcast or www.deadtalks.net. Thank you so much.